recording is started, and have a good interview.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you. All right. Well, so for all of our viewers for Fremont Now, thank you. This is Chris Peeples. He is running for the position, the AC Transit Board of Director. He's actually the current incumbent. For all of you guys that don't know what incumbent means, it means he currently holds that position. And we're just going to have a quick little interview to get to know Chris and more about the position itself, and who better to learn it from than the person that's currently in it. And to start off, we just want to know, the first question really is, who is Chris Peeples, and why are you running again for this position as the AC Transit Board Director?
Who is Chris Peeples? Chris Peeples is an ardent progressive Democrat, have been doing that for many years. I've been a transit aficionado for a great many years. I grew up in San Francisco, which in the 50s and 60s, which had adequate transit, but my mother was French, and I would go back and visit my grandparents who lived in Paris. Paris has real transit. The Paris subway runs every 90 seconds. Wow. The bus that goes down the little street, my mother sort of lived, I've still got the apartment, but she's passed away, lives sort of out on the edge of Paris. Bus comes every 4 minutes. That's transit. And what it does is it enables people to live in fairly dense communities without a car. I gave up my car 22 years ago. I've been on the board for 22 years. I gave up my car 22 years ago and didn't use it a whole lot before then. I believe that cars are very destructive to the environment, and if I can live without one, I would prefer to. Mm-hmm. So I got involved in AC Transit, back in the 80s, when it had some fairly severe problems, and Tom Bates, who was then my assembly member, he later on became mayor of Berkeley and served as mayor of Berkeley for a very long time, was sort of taking over the board. Okay. And a friend of mine joined the board, and he decided to, when his daughter, who is now graduated from graduate school and has kids, was just starting kindergarten, and he wanted to spend more time at her school. So he resigned from the board. I got myself appointed, which was a whole other story. Mm-hmm. And then that was in November of 97. And the way the law works, if you get appointed more than, I think it's 120 days before an election, you then have to run at the next election to fill out the remainder of the term.
So it's a requirement.
Correct. It's a state law.
Interesting. Wow.
Okay. Uh-huh. So I got appointed in November of 97. I ran in November of 98 to fill out the remainder of that term, which was until 2000. And then I've run every 4 years since then. I've become even more of a bus geek than I was before. When I travel, I visit bus factories. I visited bus factories in Belgium. I've visited bus factories in South Carolina. I've visited bus factories all over the place to see how these damn things are built and how they make them. I am, I say immodestly, one of the world's experts on hydrogen fuel buses. I've lectured in the United States. I've lectured in Europe. I've been invited to lecture in China. Really? And we have, AC Transit has the largest fleet of hydrogen fuel cell buses in the world.
So that is, that was a great segue. I don't know if a lot of people know that. I personally rode the AC Transit a lot, especially as a kid, and I personally did not know that. But I think with everything, all the hype, especially in the Bay Area, with all these electric vehicles, all these hydrogen fuel cell things going on, that's really impressive. And I had no idea. And that leads to the next question then is, what would you say is your greatest accomplishment in your career?
Well, there are a couple of them. One is the hydrogen fuel cell program. We have the largest one in the world. We've just got 5 battery electric buses. Mm-hmm. We're going to get 25 more battery electric buses and 20 more of the new hydrogen fuel cell buses. We've been running them for almost 20 years, but
Wow.
we just got the new American-made ones. And we're going to run a 30 by 30 by 30 by 30 by 30 test. We're going to take 30 hydrogen fuel cell electric buses, 30 battery electric buses, 30 diesel electric buses, diesel hybrids, and 30 diesel buses, and run them on the same routes with the same drivers. Drivers will switch off every couple of days. The buses are going to be instrumented to hell and back. And the National Renewable Energy Lab, Center for Technology and the Environment, and I forget his name, but a guy who is a Stanford professor of mechanical engineering and his grad students are going to do all the analysis on it. And that project is being watched by transit agencies all around the world because nobody's ever done this before. Nobody has ever done a direct head-to-head, apples-to-apples comparisons. You can go on various bus manufacturers' websites and get what's essentially marketing information, but this is a test that's going to be done by an agency actually in the field and evaluated by people who have the analytic skills to do the analysis and do all that stuff.
And when you say the field being the Bay Area and the AC Transit.
No. AC Transit routes. I mean, these buses are going to run on ordinary AC Transit routes.
Wow.
Right. So this is not in a laboratory. This is in what we call revenue service, driving down the street, putting butts in seats, getting them to where they're going. Because that's basically our job. Our job is to put butts in seats and move them to wherever they want to go. School, church, work, doctor's appointments, whatever they want to do. We don't ask. You get on, you pay your $250, and we take you there.
So then buses aren't just economically and more efficient for the environment just based on, the amount of people that can be on it, but now they're actually better for the environment just based on how they function.
Correct.
Wow.
Correct.
That's
and, partly as a result of our work over the last 20 years, the California Air Resources Board enacted in December of 2018 the Innovative Clean Transit Rule, which requires every bus in the state of California to be zero emission by 2040. It sounds like it's a long time away, but because you have to keep a bus 12 years, that means beginning in 2028, every bus that every transit agency in California purchases must be zero emission. That's one of the reasons why this test we're doing is so important.
So this is very important, and I think a lot of us are trying to realize. And how long have you been working on this project for? Because you've been
20 years.
20 years. Wow.
We've been operating fuel cell buses for a little under 20 years. We started out with a little 30-foot Thor that had a 60 kilowatt UTC fuel cell and NiCad batteries. We then created our own buses. We created 3 buses that used Von Hall A330 bodies. Those are the 3-door Von Halls with the engine on the left rear. And we ran those for a while. That was a preliminary test. And after that, the requirement for zero emission was going to come on much earlier. And in 2009, I actually went down to San Diego and testified in front of the CARB board and said, look, I am the world's greatest proponent for this technology. It's not ready yet. It's not ready yet. So they then did an advanced test, and we got 12 buses, this time actually completely made by Von Hall, a Belgian company we were working with, and have been running those. That was a huge success. They were 5,000 pounds lighter. They had greater range. They had all kinds of things. We then managed to convince 2 American companies to begin producing these buses. New Flyer, which is the largest manufacturer of buses in North America, is making both hydrogen fuel cell electric and battery electric. And El Dorado, which is a company down in Southern California, is making fuel cells. So I mean, they're still, we don't yet have the economics of large production, right? Our first fuel cell buses were $3.2 million each.
Oh my.
And, you know, they were very experimental. The next batch, when we got to 12, the three were out of a build of four buses. The U.S. builds about 5,000 buses a year. Medium, large diesel engines, which go in buses and in trucks, about 100,000 of them a year are built. So if you're talking about four, you're not talking about very large quantities.
Right.
Our 12 came from a build of 16. We got 12. Connecticut Transit got 4 because that's where the United Technologies Corporation was headquartered.
Got it.
And they were 2.5 million each. The 10 that we got from New Flyer, Orange County Transit also got 10. So it was out of a build and Sunline got 5. So it was out of build of 25. Price dropped in half again to 1.25 million. Regular diesel bus costs about $500,000, a little more, but call it $500,000. We are working on trying to put together a 100 bus order. Foothill Transit, that was one of the first big users of electric buses, have decided for many of their routes they don't work. They've ordered 20. North County Transit in San Diego has ordered 10, 5 for delivery next year and 5 for delivery in 22. And Golden Empire Transit has ordered 8. We're trying to put together enough other orders. We're going to order 20 to get a 100 bus order. New Flyer says with a 100 bus order, they think they can get the price down to 850,000. So they're still expensive.
Yeah.
But the trend is what we want to see as it goes further and further.
Yeah, it's getting close to that diesel bus pricing.
The Europeans have a 400 something bus order out on the street. Wow. There's an entity of the common market that promotes hydrogen and fuel cells, and they've put together this order, putting together orders from people all around the EU. That bus is coming in at about 650,000 euro, which God only knows what the exchange rate is this week. I mean, everything's so crazy, but somewhere around 700,000. So, and the Europeans really believe that once the industry is fully mature, a hydrogen fuel cell bus will be considerably cheaper than a diesel bus because it's much less complicated. It's got some fancy pieces to it. The membrane that separates the electrons from the protons in the hydrogen has a lot of palladium in it and platinum, and that's expensive. Do you know how a fuel cell works?
I do not. And
I can do it real briefly.
Sure.
Basically, a fuel cell is a little aluminum bottle. Down the center of the bottle, there's a membrane. It looks and feels like a garbage bag. Looks and feels like heavy-duty saran wrap. But in fact, it's doped with a catalyst so that when you put pure hydrogen on one side of it and air on the other, the protons from the hydrogen go through that membrane. The electrons are held back. And the electrons want to catch up with the proton so they can mate with the oxygen and form water. So the electrons, which are on this side of the membrane, flow through the aluminum bottle to get to the other side. If you remember your high school physics, electron flow is electricity by definition. So you grab up that electricity and use it. Either all of our hydrogen fuel cell buses are hybrids. So you either use it to charge up the battery or drive the bus, or both. On the Van Holds, I don't know quite exactly how many we've got in the new Flyers, but in the Van Holds, the fuel cell stack, essentially the fuel cell engine, has 544 of those individual fuel cells.
544 fuel cells stacked in one bus.
No, but 544 fuel cells in the stack.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. And each of them produces about 1.5 volts. So you get 600 volts, which is what, for example, the trolley buses in San Francisco run on 600 volts. That's a pretty standard voltage for a heavy duty vehicle. And so you get 600 volts at I forget how many amps, but enough to produce the equivalent of a 250 horsepower diesel engine.
Wow, that is very powerful. And I get, like, with all the technology coming out here and all these new companies coming out here with what they're doing, it's kind of cool to know that at the heart of it is actually the Bay Area.
Yep.
That's awesome. Because there's
although fuel cells that UTC, which was in Danbury, Connecticut, got out of the fuel cell business. It's now, the heavy duty side is largely Ballard, which is up in a suburb of Vancouver, Canada. But Hyundai, the Korean company, is doing a whole lot in fuel cells, has the most advanced Class 8 fuel cell trucks. Class 8 is 18-wheelers, it's big trucks. And they just got an order of 1,600 of them from the two big grocery chains in Switzerland. Think of it as Albertsons and Safeway before they merged. They wanted to get new refrigerator trucks. They wanted them to be zero emission, but obviously it's very cold there at times, and there are lots of hills, and batteries just can't handle that. So they wanted fuel cell trucks, and they ended up getting Hyundais, to the great embarrassment of Volvo and Mercedes, who tends to think of themselves as the people who make trucks in Europe.
Right.
But they're both working on fuel cell trucks, but they're a number of years behind where Hyundai is.
And that really matters, as we can see with everyone trying to keep up with Tesla and the electrical vehicles. They just can't even make anything like the Model S. So to summarize, your greatest accomplishment is really your work within really transforming the whole entire, transportation system in the Bay Area, as well as really your work within the hydrogen fuel cells and heavy duty vehicles. And what does that do for—
That's probably what I think of as my greatest accomplishment. I've also done a whole lot of stuff in environmental justice and transportation.
Right.
Trying to get equal funding for bus systems and rail systems. There was a lawsuit a few years ago, so these numbers are a little bit out of date, but the average Caltrain rider, 60% of the average Caltrain riders are white. Average family income is $125,000 a year, and their rides are subsidized about $14 per ride.
Wow.
BART is about 45% white, average family income of about $90,000, and their rides are subsidized about $6 a ride. AC Transit is 20% white ridership and an average family income of $27,000, and their average ride is subsidized a little under $3 a ride. So I've worked on that issue a whole lot over a great many years. The third thing I do that's different than what a lot of other folks do is I try to act as a bridge between the academic community and the practitioners at AC Transit. A lot of our planning folks have higher education degrees and all that. A lot of the operations folks don't. And so for the last 20 years, I've attended Transportation Research Board, which is the most prestigious transportation conference in the world. Takes place in Washington, D.C., second week of January every year, so it's cold as hell. Well, not necessarily cold. It's often rainy and miserable. But hotel rooms are really cheap then, so they do that. But TRB is the transportation piece of the national academies. The NIH is health, NSF is pure science, TRB is transportation. And this year, Lord only knows, they're going to try to do it virtually. Last year, there were 15,000 people at the conference. And my favorite session of all time that I did not attend at TRB is the performance of epoxy-coated reinforcing bar in cement bridges over salt water. I figured that would be of great interest to the Florida DOT. I'm not sure who else would be interested,
Right.
But I've always thought of that as sort of an amusing an amusing session. But there are about 1,000 sessions every year, and a bunch of them have to do with transit, everything from route planning to alternative fuels and all that stuff. And I'm a friend of the Alternative Fuels Committee, the Environmental Justice Committee, and the Public Involvement Committee.
Mm-hmm. So, you have a lot of experience in working with different classes. You have a lot of experience in working, within transforming your whole entire transportation system. What would you say is the greatest challenge you got to overcome in your career?
The greatest challenge is money. I mean, it's very bizarre. I came into this because I love transit. I'm a fairly good shade tree mechanic. I mean, nowadays, nobody's a good shade tree mechanic because it's all chips and more computerized. I had a 1952 MG and a 1966 Volvo, and everything was mechanical. They didn't have power brakes. They didn't have an automatic transmission, nothing. Right. And on those, I'm a pretty good mechanic. But what really ends up driving us crazy all the time is getting the money to run the system. It's about $600 million a year. I have chaired or co-chaired 3 of our partial tax measures. We don't run partial tax measures in South County because the polling tells us not to, and 2, local electeds down there have told us they'll oppose them, usually because they have a conflicting ballot measure whenever we want to put it on. But in what we call Special District 1, which is everything except Fremont and Newark, there's a $96 a year parcel tax that brings in a chunk of money to us. I have worked on, it's either 4, I guess it's 5 different county sales tax measures. Last couple of years, I've spent most of my time up in Contra Costa County because they were going to propose an additional half-cent sales tax to the one they already have. The 2004 Measure J is a half-cent sales tax.
Right.
They were going to put another half-cent on. And so I worked with the social justice and transportation and environmental and labor folks trying to craft that measure so it was as favorable to us as possible. That became Measure X, which failed in 2018. They redid it, and we were able to get it much more favorable to all those groups. In 2020, they ran Measure J, again called Measure J, in March of 2020, and unfortunately that failed as well. So I have my ear to the ground up there about, are they going to give it a shot again? But they spent a whole lot of money in 2018 and 2020, so I think they have to lick their wounds and try and do it. But I will be in there again, trying to get as much money for buses as possible. And I've done a lot of lobbying at both the state and federal level on on all kinds of funding issues. I've lobbied the last 3 transportation bills in Washington.
So funding is, of course, I think everyone agrees that funding is a big issue in almost all areas of the government, and it's hard to see like who deserves what money or what where can we get more funds. Just a quick question. So is mostly all transportation within the Bay Area just mainly subsidized for the most part?
Yes. Yes.
So then what oh, go ahead.
You get these figures sometimes get a little strange because rail systems are very capital intensive. So they always brag about the fact that they get a very large percentage of their operating revenue from the fare box. I mean, BART's around 60% out of the fare box. But what they don't count in that is the capital subsidies. But that's somewhere around here. I've got the chart. Well, I don't have it printed out. I've got it on my computer.
No problem.
I've got a chart that's got the major funding sources of all the transit agencies. And I think the highest is about 60-70% for the ferries. But even they are 30 or 40% subsidized. So the bus agencies are all over 80% subsidized.
So what could we do then to potentially incentivize people more to use public transport in order to perhaps increase those numbers and, not require so much? I mean, we'll always need subsidizing, and for all these guys that don't know, it's like government funding or aid from, taxes. And so what can we do to incentivize people to really not rely so much on that, or just have more people using public transport?
Two things. One is to stop subsidizing the automobile. We go to war and spend trillions of dollars defending our oil fields and our oil supplies, and none of that gets put on the price of gas. Many of the negative consequences of everybody driving cars never gets put on the price of gas. All of your highways, your major highways, are paid for by the gas tax, but all of your local roads and streets are paid for by something else. And if you go to Japan or you go to Europe, you're talking about the equivalent of $7 or $8 a gallon. That's one place where you start. Also, we have this crazy habit, particularly on the West Coast, of bundling housing for cars with housing for people. And one of the things I've worked on for many years, and I was successful in Oakland, I've been successful in Emeryville, and they've started doing it in Berkeley, is what's called decoupling. So that if you rent an apartment or buy a condo, it doesn't come with a deeded parking space included. You got to do that separately, so that people are actually. Hopefully, that makes the apartment cheaper. Hopefully, people are aware of, what they're paying rather than having it hidden in the price of their rent. So that's part of it. Another part of it is trying to deal with what Jerry Brown kept calling elegant density. Trying to get some density so that there is enough people per acre, per square mile, per block, whatever you want to call it, so that you can actually run an efficient transit system. As I was talking about with Paris, if you got a bus every 4 minutes, you don't worry about schedules, you don't worry about anything like that. You walk out, and that means on average, you're going to wait 2 minutes for a bus. That's going to have a whole lot more people taking buses. So that's part of it. We could do, we just spent $29 million on a new CAD AVL system, computer aided design, automated vehicle locator, so that if you take out your phone and either use the AC Transit app or the little green squiggle app, that's much more accurate. That's very helpful to getting people to take a bus. There's there's still some problems with it, and and if a bus disappears, rather than saying it's not there, it defaults to the schedule, which I think is stupid. But you know, that's another way to get people to take the bus more. It's got to be frequent. It's got to be reliable.
Right.
You know, and it's got to be comfortable. And our new buses are actually pretty comfortable. I prefer the old wool seats to the new plastic ones, but I got overruled on that one.
Yeah, I mean, no, they definitely are a lot nicer than when I was riding when I was going to middle school. But no, it really is nice. And so I guess to summarize what you're saying, part of it is definitely population density. Another part of it is actually getting people more involved with technology that can be beneficial for both sides.
Yep.
I see. Because, you know, I think we all know how fast this area is growing. And at the same time, there's so much money coming in here, but it's not equally distributed, you know,
right,
like within the community. And so, yeah, this is really good stuff. And I don't think I definitely didn't know about this stuff. I didn't really know about a lot of it. So it's good that you're bringing this to light. This is what this platform is all about. So thank you for that. But, you know, one of the major problems, especially right now with funding and actually just generating revenue, is because of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm sure people are avoiding public transport as a result of it. And I mean, you know, it is fair. It's the reason why. But what do you have in mind to increase safety of public transport for people, like both the drivers and the passengers, during this pandemic and these times?
We've been doing a tremendous amount of work on that. And it frustrates me that BART has done a much better job of the PR than we have. But many of the things that they are talking about, we have also been doing. We're putting plexiglass shields to protect our drivers in all our buses. That's going to allow people to begin to come into the front door again. When the pandemic started, we're asking everybody who's not in a wheelchair or mobility device to enter through the back door. And we've roped off the front of the bus so that people don't interact with the driver. We've done social distancing on the buses, which is pretty drastic because, for example, our standard 40-foot coach, which can crush load at about 55, 60 people, you know, during the rush with everybody jammed in there as much as they can, is limited to 10 people. And when they get more than 10 people, the driver puts up the drop-off only sign and goes on down the road. Now, the driver also radios in and they send out another coach, a backup coach. And we've got backup coaches pre-positioned all around the district. So we can do that a little better. That only works because we've got our local ridership's down about 65%. Our Trans-Bay ridership is down about 95%.
My goodness.
And same thing with BART. BART's ridership is down about 95%. I mean,
wow.
It's amazing, but we are now carrying more people than BART. And really? I never thought I would ever see that in my life. A whole lot more people. A whole lot more people
BART right now.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yep. Yep, it is completely crazy. But BART riders, like our Trans-Bay riders, are usually knowledge workers, and they can work from home, right? Whereas our local riders are often essential workers.
Right.
They are, you know, janitors in a hospital or cashiers in the grocery store. They are not people who can work from home. They've actually got to be there and they got to do the work. what that is going to mean for the long term, I mean, there's a lot of talk about people working from home permanently. I don't think that's going to happen. This waxes and wanes, and I've been watching this for 50 years. All of a sudden, everybody says, "Oh, we hate the density in the city. We're going to go out and build campuses in the suburbs and whatever."
Right.
And then they discover, I really do want to go out to lunch with my banker and find out what's going on. I want to go out to lunch with my lawyer and find out what's going on. So senior management often moves back into the central city. And I think that cycle is going to happen again. I think for a few years, there are going to be a lot of people working from home. And some of that's going to continue forever. But what I've seen people beginning to talk about is, people coming into work a couple of days a week, doing the rest of their work at home. That works okay for middle class people who've got a spare bedroom and, some space. It doesn't work very well for people who are already pretty crowded. And we're really seeing that with the school kids.
Yeah, that's another problem. I think school kids especially are very reliant on public transport, particularly AC transit.
30,000 kids a day.
There we go. I had no idea that's such a massive number.
30,000 kids a day ride AC transit.
And so how is that going to, move forward? Or like, how are they going to continue to do that? I know the school thing is not necessarily your, education, not necessarily your department in terms of like what your
But
work
it is. It is. We work very closely. We got 13 school districts within our district. Jean Deslejean is the school planner. We got one planner who does nothing, 40 hours a week, other than keep in contact with all the school districts. None of the school districts know what the hell they're doing yet. And that makes it very difficult. And some of them are trying to do things like bring some of the students in for half a day. That works fine for schools that are on a heavy bus line already. The Oakland Tech or Oakland High. Oakland Tech's on the 51, Oakland High's on the 57. Both of those are about 12-minute lines. So the kids just get on the bus and go to the bus and go to school. But we've got schools that are much more out of the way, like Skyline High in Montera. And we run special service to them. We run 600 buses. It's 600 number buses, not 600 buses. Our total fleet is about 638. So we run 600 number buses up there, and they are melded in to the rest of the schedule. Mm-hmm. So for example, what'll happen often is what goes up to Skyline? 647. A 647 will do a run up to Skyline, maybe two. Mm-hmm. Then it'll come down and become a Transbay bus and do a couple of the late Transbay runs. And then it will either go back in the yard or it will pick up one of the regular bus lines. We can't just say, oh, okay, so half your kids are coming at 8 o'clock in the morning and half of them are coming at noon. Well, we can run all those 600 series buses at noon. We don't have the buses for that. So that's, to say that our people are working very hard on that's an understatement. Mm-hmm. And folks are really going crazy over that. That's not all that common down in Fremont. We've got, I think, 2 schools down there where we run 600 series buses, and we've got another couple of schools that are on a regular bus line, but we run our ticks, the 60-foot buses that bend in the middle. Mm-hmm. We run our ticks at the times when the schools come in and go out. So, this is not as much of a problem for Fremont as it is for some of the stuff up here in the northern part of the district.
Right. Northern East Bay. Wow. So I know we're kind of running out of time. Thank you.
Yeah, I had no idea how long this was going to last. I'm happy to go on as long as you want.
Oh, I'm sure we can definitely have a very informative conversation after this. But unfortunately, for the sake of the viewers, we do need to keep it within 45 minutes or so.
Okay.
However, are there any last words that you want to have, either just to discuss yourself or any topic that you're very passionate about? I mean, I know there's so many things you're involved in terms of not just the environment or just classism or just like batteries, even fuel cells.
Yep.
What is something that you'd want to have us all leaving with today?
Well, I'm an at-large director, which means I represent the whole district, and I sort of pinch it where I'm needed. There have been a couple of times where I have been the director for Ward 5 for Fremont Newark. When I first got on the board, we had a nut that got elected down there. She'd sued both Fremont and Newark. None of the electeds or senior staff would talk to her. So for 4 years, I was essentially the AC Transit director for Fremont and Newark. Came to know the community pretty well and did a lot of stuff down there. And then a couple of years ago, the director who was down there got ill. And so I had to pinch it for him a whole lot. Did a bunch of work with the Sikh Gurdwara on industrial and some other stuff. I working together with Elsa Ortiz, who was the board president in 2018, managed to convince Diane Shaw to run. She is now your ward director, and she's great. She was the CTO at Samtrans, and when she retired, she became head of the charitable foundation at the Elks, at the Fremont Elks. Mm-hmm. So, she was on the mobility commission and a whole bunch of stuff. Mm-hmm. So, I'm always down there for big events. I sit our booth at Art and Wine and at Festival of Globe and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And partly because I commuted for 30 years from Oakland to San Jose. Right. Half the questions that we get asked at one of those big festivals is, how do I get to San Jose? And of course, our people don't know that because we don't go there. Right. But I did it for 30 years. So I know how to take the 181, the 180, the Capitol Corridor, all that stuff. So I come down there for that. But nowadays, I basically follow Diane's lead. She's very involved in the community. You're really lucky to have her. Awesome. Oh, that's awesome. Anything you want to say just about perhaps maybe your campaign, or just like who is Chris Peeples again? Like, what is that you really want? What is that you stand for? What is it like? Is there anything you want us to all just like leaving with? What's the one? Well, I've pretty much talked about what I do. I mean, I grew up in San Francisco, moved to Oakland in 1975. I practiced law for 33 years and retired after I had a stroke in 2010. And so I work on AC Transit full time. I go into the office almost every day, at least pre-pandemic I did. Now I'm on Zoom all the time. Right. And I've been very active in Democratic politics forever. I mean, right. That's why I'm endorsed by both Lily May, your current mayor, and Bill Harrison, your former mayor, and right. Bob Wachowski, your state senator, who I knew when he was on the Fremont City Council. So I do a lot of that stuff. And, I'm pretty loquacious, so I'm always happy to talk to anybody who wants to talk to me. Sure. Awesome. Good to know. Great. Well, thank you so much, Chris. I mean, this is definitely very educational for sure. We learned a lot, not just about the impacts of like what you've been doing and like what you've been accomplishing for us, but also like kind of what you stand for as a person. I think that's really good that we have someone like that within your position. We definitely want to have more conversation with you. I'm sure you could have a very informational podcast about things from the environment to like battery fuel cells and all of that. But thank you so much for your time. And we'll be ending the recording right now.